Phase 1 clone armor took heavy inspiration from Mandalorian armor, and it was developed in consultation with Jango Fett and the Mandalorian members of the Koival Da, the mercenaries Fett brought in to train the clone commandos. The Kaminoan armorsmiths analyzed Fett's own armor and used it as a basis for the armor they issued to the clones. Nonetheless, clone armor wasn't straight up Mandalorian, and the Kaminoans instilled it with their own sensibilities as well. Like many Kaminoan products, it was made of plastoid, a lighter and more readily available substance than Beskar or Durasteel, and though it appeared bright white to the humans that wore it, it was covered in patterns only visible to those who could see ultraviolet light, much like the Kaminoan cities were. The Kaminoan armorsmiths had a division of weaponsmiths, but they subcontracted the development of most of the Grand Army's infantry weapons to Blastech Industries. Blastech was one of the galaxy's 3 big arms dealers, and the Kaminoans got them to develop several exclusive lines of high-powered blasters and other weapons for the Grand Army. In a select few cases, the Grand Army was equipped with standard-issue munitions obtained from one of Blastech's rivals, Merson Munitions, but these were obtained on the market rather than specifically subcontracted. Finally, the Kaminoans subcontracted Kuat Drive Yards, and in particular its secret subsidiary, Rathana Heavy Engineering, to build the Grand Army's arsenal of vehicles. RHE was based on Rathana, a remote planet whose location was known only to members of the subsidiary and the executives at KDY, making it ideal for the development of vehicles for the secret army. Rathana had allowed KDY to develop new vehicles in complete secrecy in the past, and it served the Kaminoans well in the same capacity. A few spaces from that corner of the Outer Rim told stories about seeing powerful, brand new war machines being tested on remote backwaters in those days, but the rumors never spread far and were rarely taken seriously, so RHE was able to keep the project under wraps. After the start of the Clone Wars, the Republic contracted a few other manufacturers to help in making new vehicles, vessels, and equipment for the Grand Army. Most notably, this included Rendili Star Drive, which collaborated with KDY on the Victor Initiative, which produced the first Star Destroyers. But, for the most part, the Republic stuck to the same pool of manufacturers since, by and large, the gear the Kaminoans had commissioned worked perfectly and only needed to be tweaked, or, in the case of the GAR's vehicle arsenal, supplemented. With all that business out of the way, let's talk about the first and most fundamental part of the clone kit, the armor. Clone armor was by and far the most recognizable symbol of the Grand Army of the Republic. Hell, it's one of the most recognizable symbols of Star Wars too. There were several variants of clone trooper armor, all of which could be modified in various ways. We're going to go over the standard editions of each kit first, and talk about the modifications second, and we'll start with the original set of clone armor, Phase 1. Every variation of clone armor included a black body glove, which covered the entirety of the wearer's body from the neck down. In conjunction with a helmet, this body glove could be vacuum sealed, pressurized, and fully insulated. Even when not sealed, it worked in conjunction with the armor's temperature control units to keep the wearer at a comfortable temperature. The body glove was also protective to an extent, as it helped insulate the wearer against skin contact poisons, extreme heat, or extreme cold. Even when pierced, it had utility, as it could act as a compression sleeve to stem bleeding. The body glove was fitted with a series of magnetomic grip panels that the suit's armor plates were attached to. All told, Phase 1 clone armor consisted of 20 plates, not counting the helmet or placard, made of a lightweight but resilient plastoid alloy, which together weighed just under 40 kilograms or 88 pounds, all told. Many of these plates were solely protective and had no additional functionality. This included the greaves and the thigh plates, which protected the wearer's legs, the gauntlet plates, which protected their hands, the rarer braces, which protected their upper arms, the shoulder bells, which protected their shoulders, and the codpiece, which protected the wearer's crotch. These plates were all solid plastoid alloy and were inflexible but protective. The armor's elbow plates and knee plates were also solely protective, but these were specially reinforced with layers of armor plate to protect against particularly debilitating injuries. Other parts of the armor had additional features built into them. Clone armor came with a pair of high traction boots, which were counted among the 20 armor plates. These were designed to allow the wearer to get the best possible grip on any surface, and they could even be magnetized for use in low gravity situations. The armor's vambrances not only protected the wearer's forearms, but also featured parts of the armor's comlink systems. Clone troopers could use buttons built into the vambraces to switch between comms channels, and these control interfaces were likely also how they tweaked the temperature settings of their suits, among other things. Finally, there was the cuirass, which protected the wearer's upper body. The Phase 1 cuirass was considerably denser than the other pieces of the armor, especially the part that protected the wearer's chest, making it much harder to pierce. The back of the cuirass, meanwhile, contained the armor's climate control systems. The cuirass was the heaviest part of the whole kit, but its added density saved many troopers' lives, absorbing energy from blaster shots that would otherwise have killed them. Speaking of, let's talk about the actual utility of clone armor for a second. Clone trooper armor, as well as stormtrooper armor, gets a bad rap for seemingly being useless, by which people typically mean that it doesn't provide perfect protection against blaster fire. But while it's true that sufficiently powerful blaster shots could burn clean through clone armor, fully blast resistant armor would have been prohibitively expensive, and blaster bolts were only one of 100 dangers a clone trooper could expect to encounter on the battlefield. They also had to reckon with shrapnel, environmental dangers, heat from fire and explosions, concussive force from explosions, fumes, and so much more. The main function of clone armor was to protect against all these secondary dangers to allow the wearer to focus on combat, and to that end, it worked quite well. Clone armor was completely resistant to temperature extremes, corrosives, toxic substances, shrapnel, bullets, and other projectiles, and even vibroblades. The molecular makeup of the armor allowed troopers to pass through most kinds of deflector shields without injury. It provided moderate protection against radiation, and yes, it protected against blaster fire to a degree as well. Clone armor could stand up to glancing blaster bolts or shots from low-powered holdout blasters, and even when blaster bolts punched through the armor, the plastoid plating and the body glove beneath absorbed a good chunk of the energy from the blast, greatly decreasing the amount of damage the bolt could do to the wearer. All of this made a massive difference in combat, saving the lives of many wounded clones and making them more effective by rendering many distractions non-factors. In the real world, more people are killed by shrapnel on modern battlefields than they are by bullets. For clone troopers, neither shrapnel nor bullets posed much of a threat. Now back to the equipment. Apart from the armor itself, the standard Phase 1 kit came with a placard worn over the abdomen, which wasn't counted among the 20 armor plates and appeared to be more flexible than the solid plastoid components of the suit. Phase 1 armor also included a utility belt, the contents of which we're going to discuss later. The final component of Phase 1 armor, and by far the most important component, was the helmet. The Phase 1 helmet was packed full of features. Obviously, it provided protection, but it also featured a tinted visor that protected the wearer against blinding flashes, and filters that allowed the wearer to breathe even in polluted or toxic environments, and an advanced electronics heads-up display. The HUDs of clone helmets were very advanced and controlled via eye movement. These allowed troopers to see through smoke and fog, to quickly identify fellow troopers and designated hostiles, and to access a wealth of sensor data about their environment. Clone helmets could even interface with standard issue Republic blasters, projecting crosshairs onto troopers' HUDs to make aiming considerably easier. Many troopers joked they were just lever arms that allowed their helmets to pull the triggers of their blasters, and while this was hyperbole, it wasn't all that far off much of the time. The helmet also contained the bulk of the armor's communications gear, featuring a comlink built into the helmet's chin, a pair of receivers over the ears, and a high-powered transmitter built into the Phase 1 helmet's distinctive fin. This internal communications gear was soundproof, and it not only allowed clones to keep in touch with their squad mates in the heat of battle, but also kept clones in contact with local LAAT gunships and forward command centers. All told, Phase 1 armor was not only comprehensively protective, but also packed full of utility. With that said, it wasn't perfect, and it had enough flaws that it was eventually phased out. The biggest flaw with Phase 1 was that it was a pain in the ass, literally. Phase 1 armor was not all that ergonomic, and in particular, it was extremely uncomfortable to sit in. This was an especially big problem for clone pilots, who probably made the Republic's chiropractors very wealthy before they were eventually given lighter, more specialized armor. Phase 1 armor was also quite heavy, which made its subpar ergonomics an even bigger problem. All this earned the Phase 1 the nickname of Body Bucket. Fortunately for the clones though, the Kaminoan armorsmiths did eventually take their feedback into account, and most of the problems with Phase 1 armor were rectified with Phase 2 armor.